I am the voice of Snowbird Nation, Mike Searcy.
Welcome, everybody, to Snowbird Nation. I'm here with Dr. Mike Searcy, the professor and CEO of Snowbird Nation. I am Steve Richardson. We're here today. We're going to be discussing expired listings. Those of you that have only had limited exposure to dealing with aspects of expired listings, this video is going to be for you. So we're going to go into it, and the best person in the world that I know of that could possibly answer some of these questions is Mr. Mike Searcy. Sir, Mike, thank you for having this video with us here. Let's talk about expired listings. What are expired listings, just in general?
In general, expired listings are those listings that should never take place. When we write an exclusive right to sell, an ER agreement, as an agent, when we put this together, there's a beginning date for that listing, and by contract law, there has to be a closing date, an end date to that listing. And if we get all the way to the closing date and that property doesn't sell, then the listing itself, by mere fact that the contract has expired, the listing has expired. And now there is no contractual relationship that exists for an active sale for possible new clients. There might be a protection clause for clients that have already seen the property, but there's no protection for that agent to try and continue to sell that house. And the seller is now free from that contract and able to accept an offer or interview other agents if they are disappointed that it did not sell.
Got it. That nails that portion of it. But I think the big question here is, then what happens to the client? So you're basically, they're no longer obligated to that contract. They can go out searching. What's the typical thing that's going on in a client's head at this point, given that they weren't able to sell their home within that given period of time?
Oftentimes, the clients are disappointed, angry. We have a number of agents out there with what I'm going to say a variable skill set. Some are trained in really extreme follow-up methods, and some are not. And some are trained to really do the due diligence on a very regular basis, and some are not. And as such, with this variability comes clients who wind up being very disappointed when they wound up hiring an agent because a really savvy sales pitch at the very beginning, or they were a friend of a friend of a relative of a friend.
Yikes.
And we didn't really check out their qualifications, and we didn't really verify their experience. That being said, what often happens is the client trusts them because they were referred, perhaps, and trust them without comparing. And if I do that and I wind up at this point randomly selecting an agent who is not really exposed and ready to do the due diligence of constant follow-up and the due diligence of their own work in, for example, the valuation of the property, so that we can actually advise you on where to market the property, at what price point, at what range. And they listen to the seller. And what happens is the seller, who's lived there perhaps for quite some time, believes their house often is worth more than the market might bear because it's their house.
Right.
And one of the things that we often have to counsel sellers about, if we've done our due diligence, is that we have to counsel them on what the market may bring, not what the dollar figure is that they've attached to sentimental value. And as such, sometimes that can be a hard pill to swallow. And if the seller insists then we must have a reality check in terms of let's try it at that price. And if we get nothing for X number of days in terms of generated interest, then let's kind of start gradually moving back to the price that, if your goal is to truly sell the property, that it needs to be at, based on my consultation and my research. Agents who take their lead from the seller entirely without consultation of the price the sellers will then blame the agent, and rightly they should, for the price, for the lack of interest, no matter how much marketing. And what often happens then is we have sellers who are angry, depressed, dejected, disappointed, enraged, and believes they were sold a bill of goods and made promises that were not fulfilled.
But what type of market can this occur in? Or the type, what are the conditions that usually generate this type of expired listing?
An expired listing can actually happen in all markets. It is more prevalent, however, in a buyer's market where there are more sellers than there are buyers, which we don't have that current situation right now. But it can also happen in a balanced market when the property is overpriced and requires lots of repairs. The buyer, if they have plenty to choose from, will have what's called, if the property is listed higher than perhaps it should, and there's a couple other on the same block that are also listed about where they ought to be, I will quietly smile if I'm not the listing agent for the one who overlisted, because I will be the person who will take advantage of what I call the boomerang effect. The boomerang effect is where we have buyers who are going to look at the one I've got listed on the block, which ought to be within the range of reasonability, and the one that is perhaps a little overpriced and is due to expire. What's going to happen is they will go look at one, they'll go look at the other, and like a boomerang, when they go look at the one that's overpriced, whether or not it needs repairs, they're going to think, "Oh my goodness," and boomerang right back to the one that I'm currently marketing, because the sellers and I came to a much better understanding in terms of terms and price the property about where the market will bear, and whether or not it bids up is irrelevant at that point, because what we're trying to do is keep interest. And it also means that the listing agent for the property that may be overpriced didn't, remember the whole follow-up thing and the variability of skill, did not follow up with all the agents to seek feedback and understand that maybe what I need to be doing is even using not my personal opinion as the agent, my professional opinion as the agent, my research that I've done as the agent, but also I can now use the feedback from the other agent and what they tell me their clients thought of the price and the condition, etc. This is information that ought to be shared regularly with the seller in order to constantly monitor and adjust the variabilities involved in marketing that house. When that's not done and little communication occurs, properties expire.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just that span of distance. I mean, what contracts here at Snowbird Nation, we could write them for 6 months. So within that period of time, the market could shift somewhere in that area right there.
Yeah.
Uh,
And in fact, if the listing agent is doing their due diligence and they're paying attention and they're in constant communication with their seller, as they ought to be. And we
and
recommend, of course, at least once a
yeah,
week,
at
a
a minimum.
telephone call with that seller. More likely, more than that. But there are agents who will list the property and forget they had a listing. And so
Wow.
they will ignore. Even when the sellers are calling, they haven't got time for that. Maybe they have another full-time job. Maybe they're on the golf course, whatever it might be, but they haven't got the time to do what they've actually promised to do. And as such, what's going to happen is the property will come up close to the date of expiration. Now, a good agent who's really on top of things will already be having that conversation with the seller about the wherefores and the whys and extend that listing so it doesn't expire. However, it's the agent who's ignoring everything, and all of
Right.
a sudden it expires. So let me put it this way. If the listing expires, it's a grand opportunity for another agent at that point.
Yeah,
Because
I mean that's the old adage, right? Where there's crisis, there's opportunity. So
yeah,
so here we go into opportunities.
okay.
You know, what are some techniques that we here at Snowbird Nation, or agents out there that are watching this video, what are some good techniques that we could hone in on expired listings and really capitalize on that opportunity?
Let's talk about contact for the first opportunity, the contact, right? So if the sellers are actually living in that property, there's nothing like a good old fashioned show up and knock on the door.
Yep, absolutely. And bring
Nothing
Brooks
like it.
Smashmeyer with you too, because he's the expert.
So we do have door knocking experts on our team who are happy to go and even do that with our agents. All right, so
Yes.
that's number one. Number two, most MLS designations, when agents put in the information in the MLS, they're not putting in the actual client's names and certainly not their telephone numbers. Uh, as such, most agents are strictly limited to knocking on the door or snail mail. Put something in the mail to that address, or the tax. You look up in the tax database to find out where they're getting their tax bills mailed to them and tax notices, because if they're not living in the property, they've filed with the county and the state tax database where they're currently living. So we want to send something to them. And I will tell you, um, I started doing that back in 1999 when I was working expireds quite a bit. And I would send a really nice letter outlining the things that I would do as an agent if I had the opportunity to represent them on their sale. And I would give them check marks, right? Here's a checklist. These are the things we do. What typically happened was about a week would go by, sometimes 2 weeks. Remember, we don't have telephone numbers, so I can't call them. I could stop by and knock on the door, but quite frankly, the first three people that are going to knock on their door after their listing, after they find out their listing expires, and they're going to find out from the first person who knocked on their door. And now they're also going to have a couple of telephone calls with some choice words with
Yep.
the person they thought was their listing agent.
Wow.
And then the second and third person who knocks on the door probably still getting the venom, if you will, from the person, from the angry individuals who thought they still had a listing and thought this was going to happen. And so you want to give it a couple of days for a cooling off period before knocking on the door, because if you're the first one to do that, they're not listening because they're
They're
probably in
upset.
disbelief. But
Yeah.
when I would send a letter actually outlining these are the things we would like to do for you, uh, then I'd get a call 3 days, 4 days, a week later, after they've had a chance to calm down, and now they've collected that there a couple letters that they may or may not have gotten, and they would look at that and go, okay. But here's the thing:
Nice.
consistency is key, because you can get yourself in an awful lot of trouble as an agent if all you do is send a letter to a single expired. Because if the day before that person signed the extension with the previous agent and you are knocking on the door, or you send a letter and it arrives a couple of days later, you can now get in trouble for soliciting an active listing, even if they didn't put it in the MLS as active re-upped yet. So the way to get around that is to print hard copy or save files of PDFs. Print every day. Consistency is key. Consistently, every day, print the expired list of the area that you're specifically wanting to target with this idea. Because saving those, and you now have proof that it expired, and you have proof you weren't targeting one listing. You were
Nice.
targeting an entire list of everything that expired.
Got it. All right. Well, I mean, it's apparent you have a lot of experience, Mike, with expired listings and the right person to talk to. So I'm gonna speak to that experience right now. What do you have? Is there a good example, something that you've seen in the past that just shows how we could take an expired listing and turn it into something uh, special?
Expired listings are something special. And there's nothing we have to necessarily do to turn it into something special. What usually has happened is it's been overpriced and neglected by the listing agent. And most sellers don't know, because most sellers think one agent is good as another. And in fact, as I've mentioned before, the variability in training and experience is vast. And as
Yes.
such, one agent certainly is not as good as another. Now, I am not going to go out and say, I'm so much better than everyone else, but I am certainly going to say, here are my credentials and here's what I bring to the table. Now, having said that, you must be prepared, because this is where it becomes unique as as being in the position of the guy that they don't like, or the gal that they don't like. You go knock on the door, or you get a call, even from that letter, for example, and you get an invitation for an interview, which is fabulous. It's fantastic, right? You're
Yes.
all
Yes.
excited. You're over the moon. I got a listing appointment. It's with an expired. And you walk in, the first thing you do is start yelling at you as if you were the one who did all the mistakes of your predecessor on the listing. And I will tell you, it's cathartic for them. And if you're not prepared, it's unnerving for you.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
Yeah, that is a.
it's almost as if you happen to be a customer service agent at a used car lot, in a used car desk at a airport, and somebody's trying to return a car and they didn't have a good experience with the car, and guess who gets the full throttle of all their venom and disappointment and upsetness? You do, behind the counter, as if you had anything to do with it.
Right.
So patience is key. Calmness is key. And let them get out what they need to get out, because oftentimes you have to understand right up front, they're not yelling at you. They're angry at a situation that should
Yep.
not have occurred.
Right.
And because they were under contract, and they probably didn't even realize they could potentially even get out of that contract, and didn't even try, and they thought they had to wait it out. So part of being a good agent in this respect is being a good bartender. Wait a minute. Did I say bartender? I
Yes,
meant
you
good
did.
therapist. Having a good ear, being a good listener,
Right.
having a sense of humor, and not trying to defend yourself in light of the accusations against someone else.
Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like it would be a very precarious position to be in, as you're sitting there. But I guess you got to remember, don't take it personal either.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
it wasn't you that caused that. You're more of the solution, to take that on.
And that's a great way of thinking about it. So we have lots of possibilities to even think about reassuring them, as to what's going on. What does that mean for doing a, over the term of that last listing contract? Did you do a valuation of that property? Do you have it with you? And in that valuation, did you kind of figure out what that valuation was worth at the beginning of that contract, and what that valuation of that property is now? And did it change?
Yeah.
Do we have notations of full education? When I say full education, sometimes we're talking about, did the seller fully understand net income from the sale? Did they fully understand what they're going to get as a result of this sale after all estimated costs? Or were they just shooting for the moon and arguing percentages and not even understanding what the dollar amounts were? And did we go over those? most of the time, the answer to that question is no. And that's why they were holding their own against a number that was not realistic in the market. And so you're going to have to take a price cut almost always with an expired. The question is, did they understand what they were going to net out of the transaction? And if the answer is no, the likelihood is they're still getting what they wanted.
Exactly.
But nobody ever walked them through and showed them exactly all the steps.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I have to say this. We really appreciate your experience and your time. It's always beneficial to learn under the professor, Dr. Mike Searcy,
Well, thank you.
and going through that. So I want to turn back to the viewers of this video. If you find this video appealing, or if you find this content appealing, please reach out to us at snowbirdnation.us. And or reach out to the person that shared this video with you, and definitely give some more information. Dr. Mike, do you got anything else that you had to close?
I don't, other than remember, Snowbird Nation, where your real estate dreams take flight. We can help both clients and agents accomplish those dreams.
Awesome. Thank you again.